Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to hold on just a minute here while our platform is letting everyone in. But in the meantime, we would love to hear from you. Give us a greeting in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from today, and we will be started shortly. Welcome, welcome. I see our numbers are growing. Thank you all for joining us. We're just holding on 1 minute while our platform's letting everyone in. And I see your greeting coming through in the chat. Feel free to add in there who you are, where you're joining us from today, and we'll be started here in a minute. All right, well, we're going to jump right into it because we have lots of great discussion to be had this afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Harnessing Our Strength, Exploring the Mental Health of Native American Communities. My name is Jackie Zimmerman. I'm the Public Education Associate at Mental Health America's National Office, and I'll be moderating our webinar for today. I have a few notes before our speakers introduce themselves. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to all registrants within 1 week. We currently do not offer CEUs, but if you would like to request a certificate of attendance, I'll post the link to that in the chat here shortly, as well as that will be included in your follow-up emails along with the recording. So you will get that later too if you miss it during our time here together. We might have some time at the end for Q&A with the audience, depending on how our conversation goes this afternoon. So please feel free to use the chat to ask questions, share knowledge, share experiences. We always encourage chat participation and look forward to hearing from you in there. And before we get started, I want to make a few acknowledgements. We're here today in celebration of Native American Heritage Month, but do want to recognize the trauma that the Thanksgiving holiday can cause many Native and Indigenous communities. We encourage everyone to focus on their mental health today and take care of yourself during this time. And although all of us, including our panelists, are joining from different locations today, we want to acknowledge that there are over 1,000 different Native American nations on Turtle Island, and each have their own individual perspective and history. We're encouraging you to take a moment today when you have some time, if you don't already know, to look into whose land you live on. And you can do that by going to native-land.ca/, and I'll also put that in the chat for you as well. Our goal for today is really to discuss the many strengths within our Native and Indigenous communities and learn from all of the knowledge and healing practices that improve the mental health of Native and Indigenous people. Which leads me to introduce our wonderful panelists that are all here joining us today. If you each would love to give us a greeting and let us know a little bit more about you, and then we'll jump into our discussion.
Why hasalhal pinchais quist Martina will sulauch intem hulauch sen aich us asin chalich kinlim kanalakan in him. My name is Martina Huelshula. I am a member of the Arrow Lakes Nation of the Caldwell Confederated Tribes. We're the Sin Aich, we're the people of the speckled fish. My given name is Skinhualx, which is just touches the ground and happens to be my great-grandmother's name, given to me by my great-grandfather back in the 60s. I think I just aged myself. I am the mother of 6 and a grandmother of 20. I'm from the Colville Reservation from the big town of Inchalam, but I'm currently living in Spokane Valley. My background is I have my PhD in traditional knowledge, and so I got to travel around the world and study with other Indigenous communities about their traditional knowledge. I worked with our tribe's language preservation program with fluent speaking elders over the years. Currently, I work in intergenerational trauma, intergenerational colonial trauma, and healing for families and tribes. And so I have different work that I'm doing in part of a team that's developing an integrative cultural healing model that's about going out onto the land and traditional harvesting practices and helping families and children in their healing from trauma. So passionate work that I love, and I'm just very pleased to be here today. And I'm going to pass it to Alexi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Signs. I go by Lex, she, they pronouns. I'm calling in from Gabrielino Tongva territory today, and I'm with the International Indigenous Youth Council. I'm the founder of the Los Angeles chapter and director, and I'm super excited to be here today to work with the rest of the panelists to talk about this very important issue. And today I brought one of my youth, B. Gallardo, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, Dagot e Shibi Gonse Inepobitiak. My name is B. I use any pronouns. Coming to you all from Tongva territory, acknowledging also that the water here is from Payahunadu, Paiute territory. I'm Apache Nyaki, but I grew up here in Tongva territory, born and raised. Yeah, and I'm here with the International Indigenous Youth Council Los Angeles chapter. I'm the communications coordinator, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I guess I can pass it to Dr. Kimberly.
Wopila. And Peter and Hippie was stay, Shante was stay Nipechu Zapo, Napo Ogna Miachia P, Mansikaja Lokoto Yate. Good morning, everyone. I greet you all with a good Lakota heart. My Lakota name is in the palm of her hand. I am Dr. Kimberly Yellowrope. I'm a recent graduate of Virginia University Lynchburg with my doctorates in healthcare administration. Just want to get some snaps out there that VUL is a historic Black college and university, and the studies were great. I do have a white hair right here, I think from the studies, but it's okay, I earned it. I am the associate director with Banner University Health Plans. I do the tribal coordination. I also work with American Indians with disabilities for the past 30-something years. I am 55, happy to be 55. I'm an elder, I've gone through my change in life. I'm a mother of 4 children. I call them children. They're 24, 23. They go to ASU. My 3rd child goes to community college studying IT cybersecurity. And my 14-year-old, I'm just so blessed to have her in athletics and sports and maintain her role as a Lakota scholar. So very proud of her for maintaining her grades. I do want to mention that March 24th, 2023 will be our 19th annual American Indian Disability Summit. It's really a great summit to attend. I can share the link with Jackie for others to access. Last year, we had over 36 states participate in our hybrid summit. The day after the 19th annual summit will be our 3rd annual American Indian Youth Disability Summit. Our focus is on resiliency and creation stories for our tribal youth with disabilities. You will not believe the creation stories that our youth have in their pockets to share with everyone from. So Palamia, Jackie, and your team there for hosting this exciting panel today. Wopila.
Chotma Sahochopoa, Shelby Rowe, Chikasha Saya. Hello, my name is Shelby Rowe. I am Chickasaw. I am descended from the Red Skunk clan. I live here in Oklahoma City, not far from our forced removal home in Oklahoma for my tribe, with our original homelands being in northern Mississippi, Alabama, and southern Tennessee. But we're here in Oklahoma now. I am the director of the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. We are funded by SAMHSA, and we are the nation's only federally funded training and technical assistance center focused specifically on suicide prevention. I am also a suicide attempt survivor. I have my master's in business administration. I've worked in public health for over 20 years, and I'm mother of 3 grown sons. So happy to be here and for our conversation today.
Thank each of you for joining us today. We have just such a fantastic group of individuals here. And so we will get right into our discussion. I know I had briefly mentioned that today really our discussion will focus around the mental health of Native and Indigenous communities and the strengths within those communities So to start off our discussion today, my first question for each of you is, how have your beliefs, traditions, or cultural practices had an impact on your personal mental health and also the mental health of the communities that you are a part of? And whoever would like to start us off can go.
I think I will go in my recovery is, as I mentioned earlier, I have PTSD and I am a suicide attempt survivor. And I think what has been more healing for me has been reconnecting and learning more about my family, about my tribe and our history, and that healing part. I think earlier in our introductions before we went live, Alexis was talking about, when we do things in tribal communities, this is for 7 generations ahead, and also for 7 generations behind. And so for my part of my healing has been, what can I do to honor my ancestors, and learning about them specifically? Where did they live? What were their lives like? What did they eat? What were their struggles? And how can I help them move that forward? But also, what can I do to make a stronger path for those to come after me? For the Chickasaw Nation, traditionally, we didn't believe in death the way we look at it in current society. We looked at it as a different season. And so looking at that is that our ancestors, when we heal ourselves, we're healing them, that they are not, they're not gone. They're still here with us. They're just living in their next season. And so that belief, I guess, that it's never too late. When we have to step back and heal, we heal for ourselves and heal for others. And for me, that feels really natural and resonates. But when I talk to some of my other friends and colleagues, they don't have that belief. And so for mine, of being connected helps to find that purpose, that what are we here for? What is your purpose? Even if all that you are able to accomplish is just to breathe that day, you are still accomplishing and a living testament to the strength of your ancestors.
Thank you, Shelby.
I'd like to say that reflect back on COVID times. They were very difficult. And coming from Rosebud Sioux Reservation, we have our ceremonies throughout the year, but most important ceremony that I like to talk about is our Sundance ceremony. At the Sundance ceremony, we have different blessings and different honorings at the ceremony. So, wedding blessings, making of relatives, hunga ceremony, name giving. And when the COVID hit, it's not just my community, it's other communities too that had to shut down, isolate, quarantine. And one thing that was an impact is not being able to go and participate. And that's a significant disruption, having your ceremonies go on for hundreds of years and then have something like the COVID happen and not being able to explain it. So my husband is Hopi, and he had difficult time during the COVID because their celebrations are also throughout the year. And he is a participant also with his community. So he had a little PTSD, a little bit withdrawn depression, and didn't recognize it until it went a little bit too far. So his concern was going back to ceremony, and Hopis, where they're at, they're on the mesas. And they were definitely shut down. You couldn't get in or out of the village. And that's where all of his family lives, his mother and his parents and brothers. So that disruption with ceremony was very difficult. But we did a workaround, and we got up and we prayed together every day, every morning, reminded ourselves to be in continual prayer because, the fear that the COVID created was something that we never experienced before. And our virtue, Lakota virtue, is to be brave and not to have cowardness. So really had to step up and find some alternative ways for him to cope, not being able to go back to ceremony because, he provides food, the corn, works the fields and all that, and not being able to go back we live in Phoenix, Mesa. It was very difficult times. So reflecting back on prayer, reflecting back on song, I went out into the park and I put my regalia on and I danced and posted the video and connected with my community. So it brings tears to my eyes. So I'm sorry that I'm crying right now, but COVID was a very big disruptor with our ceremonies and how we had to find other ways to cope and manage. And last year they had ceremony and they had it up on the rosebud and they had a flyer. And we didn't know some of our relatives, our grandparents and grandmas and aunties and uncles had passed from COVID. And they did have a flyer that had over 100 or so names on it that they were going to honor at that Sundance ceremony. So times are hard, have self-care, find ways to navigate through the loneliness and isolation that the COVID brought. It was very difficult. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. I can't remember her name. Dr. Martina.
Thank you, Dr. Yellowrobe. I'd have to say for me, it's as a teenager, well, my grandmother, she was a fluent speaker in our language. And when we moved back to the reservation, we were living with my grandma and my other aunties. And so we were all packed in the house. And I was a young teen at the time. And just being around my grandmother and just kind of learning, hearing her stories, and my aunties, and their stories. I also, I have 3 generations of my mom, my grandma, and my great-grandparents all went to boarding school. And so I was parented out of the boarding school discipline, all of that. So I have complex PTSD as a result of that. And so a lot of, growing up and a lot of violence in the home and just a lot of, issues that would come up. And then just a lot of like bullying that happened in school. So it was just a lot of trauma, a lot of violence that was happening. And the way that I handled that was to be outside. As much as I could go outdoors and build forts and go swimming and, chase snakes and turtles and, all of those kinds of things, just being outside was the most healing experience for me. And we lived around a lake. So I swam all summer long and ice skated all winter long, and just did the best that I could, just trying to get by as a teenager. But when, living with my grandma and then actually going to live with other elders and learning a lot of the teachings, how to sweat, how to build a sweat, how to tan hides, how to skin a deer, how to use deer brain, to make your hide nice and soft, making hand drums, all of those things, regalia, everything. And that in and of itself, with cousins, with extended family, with aunties and grandmas and grandpas, I got to, spend time with medicine people, and the teachings that come from that. And I think, for our kids and for our teenagers, our youth, that has to be the most powerful healing modality, is to be immersed, and having people care enough to pass on those teachings, because, and I'm going to cry because they give it with such love. It's like they give it with such love because they love their culture. They love their worldview. They love everything about their languages, everything, and they want to give and share. And that in and of itself, that act was just so like, I have value. I'm worthy enough for them to want to give that to me. And then, so now it's like I study the neurobiology of our cultural practices. So much of what happens in our brains and in our bodies as a result of all of our different cultural ways of being in the world is so healthy for, even if we're looking at healing epigenetic trauma, right? Epigeneticists will talk about, our DNA and our genes and those trauma markers and what happens, but all of the things that our culture teaches us actually helps in healing that epigenetic trauma. And so I can, in all of that then begin to heal those future generations, right? Like the epigeneticists say, you are what your grandmother ate. So I'm thinking about myself and my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, and like you were talking, Shelby, as you go forward, right? But also even going back. And so looking at the whole, and that's what's so cool about the Indigenous worldview, is that all ages emerge in the present. It's like we embody all of it, type of a thing. And so I'd have to say, I'm a jingle dancer. As a teenager, my cousins and we started a drum. We had uncles that would teach us songs, and stuff. And so in that singing together, think of all the oxytocin, right? All of the emotional bonding that's happening in those moments when we were drumming and singing together. We were feeling connected, and so there's so much. And I just love to share as much as I can. Most of the time, I'm like, oh my God, you know what's happening right now in your brain? When you're doing this, it is so cool. And I think that I just think about the resilience of our ancestors in even when it was against the law and they could have been killed. They went underground and they preserved our culture and our languages. And I think that that's what saved us. And that's what's been able to allow me to live a life. I'm not healed. I have had to do a whole lot of hard work, and I'm still doing that hard work and trying to help my children, grandchildren. But for the most part, I've been able to achieve a certain level of healing as a result of all those cultural things that I've been able to do. And being like what the elders tell you, just be a good relative, right? It's all about relationships. And so I try to keep that in my mind all the time, that it's really all about relationships, but it's not just human and interpersonal relationships. It's about our relationship with all of creation, and how can we be there in a good way, in all of who we are. So I really have to give a lot of thanks and gratitude to my elders and others that have been so gracious and generous, with their teachings. And I like to pay it forward as much as I can.
Thank you, Dr. Martina.
Yeah, I can share a little bit. First of all, I just want to give just so much acknowledgement and just gratitude for the other panelists that are here today. Amazing words and amazing spirit, amazing medicine. Kind of hard to follow up with that. But I think in my personal experience, my culture has really taught me mindfulness, has really taught me connection and patience. I think, or for some kind of personal context, I was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and it's been hard navigating around that in my life. I'm very young. I'm only 21 years old. So it's hard to have to sit with that and heal from that. But I think in all of the community that I've been in, it's just been really centered around mindfulness and connection. Growing up here in Tongva territory, ever since I was little, like one of my earliest memories was being in powwow, like laying down on the blanket, like my grandma was braiding my mom's hair, and just all these warm memories of connection. And like in the darkest moments that I've felt, I've always been reminded that my ancestors are with me, that my family is with me, that my community is with me, my friends. And so it's really taught me to take things slow. One of the most profound moments that we had recently at IOICLA, we had a community action mural for our Tongva relatives. And, it was this big old like mural that said, free the river, heal the land. And in the midst of everyone just kind of like painting and, talking and just, working on this project, we saw this hawk fly right over us. And so it was just unbelievable to watch everyone pause and look at this hawk and acknowledge the ancestors that were with us, acknowledge that we weren't alone. And for a moment, everything was silent. And I was talking with one of my Tongva friends, and he was saying that, for him, it was a very heavy moment. His ancestors were buried not too far from where we were doing this mural. And so in that moment, we really all felt connection to look at each other and see each other working on this mural, to see our ancestors right next to us, to see just community was really beautiful. And so throughout all of this, I really kind of had to practice using rest as resistance. And that includes ceremony. The way that I was taught is, after ceremony, you're in this period of connecting with your physical, your mental, emotional, and spiritual, and you need time to come back to your body. So you take like 4 days, like a week off to just come back to yourself. And I've been very grateful for my elders, for my community, to just kind of really remind me to take rest and to be in the moment and be mindful. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone on this panel, for sharing their personal experiences. For me, it's definitely impacted my mental health in a big way. Being able to connect with my beliefs and traditions and cultural practices. When I was younger, I didn't grow up with them as much. I'm mixed, so my mom is European, American, and my dad is Indigenous and Spanish. And so for me, a lot of my connection was through food and my grandma, and learning, through her, and who her family is from New Mexico. And then my grandpa's family is from Durango, Mexico, Tepuanes territory. And so, that was how I was able to learn. It was through my grandmother and through the teachings that she taught me. And later I was able to find community, but it was very hard for me growing up and living in kind of both worlds, also being a person whose parents were divorced at a very young age, right after I was born. It's hard to like find that sense of community and find those practices. Me and my sister had to really like search for it and search for community. But with finding that community and finding our cultural practices and beliefs and traditions, it has given me purpose. It has given me a sense of belonging and a groundedness to my day to day. A lot of times I'm constantly feeling imposter syndrome, and it's really hard to I use the things that I've learned to like really ground myself out of that and to remember who I am. And with being able to ground yourself in these practices, it's a way to also decolonize our mind and redo all the harm that has been caused by colonization and taking us away from our traditional practices. And it's given me a way to remember who I am, to remember my ancestors, and remember my ancestors claim me. And practicing them is an act of just remembering them and standing strong in my power and who I am. And, these practices brought me back to myself. And I get emotional saying that too, as well, because it did. And it brought me back to my ancestors. And I've seen these practices bring other people back to themselves. And it's important that these practices, traditions, and ceremonies and beliefs are in our lives, because they are very powerful and very healing.
I had so much to say and wanted to have a chance for everyone else to talk, but I think it all comes up to like being a good relative and some of that. And Dr. Martina earlier mentioned, from the boarding school era and that epigenetics. And so many, I've always lived in urban areas. I never had a chance to live kind of surrounded by my people. And so that yearning, and others at my school, like, I don't belong. And so feeling like you don't belong and knowing that something is missing, but not really knowing what that is, does lead to a lot of depression, loneliness, and where do I fit in? Where do I belong? In my family, Alexis, mine too, is, European and Native. And, just the genetic lottery, I look more native than all of my cousins and siblings. And so felt like I don't look like everyone else other than my grandmother. But finding, older pictures and things. And a friend of mine is a therapist who works with the Choctaw Nation. And it said that when people come in for therapy, oftentimes they'll say, I really want to incorporate traditional healing. And I said, great, what does that look like for you? And oftentimes they cry and say, I don't know, but I want it and I need it. And so I think part of that for all of us on here of different ways of finding our way home, either more, recently, I would just almost cried with each of my other panelists talking, when Kimberly, Dr. Yellow Robe was talking about going back to ceremony, not being able to connect and do ceremony was very hard. Being a good relative involves being in person and doing things. And so seeing the creative ways that a lot of our tribes and people tried to stay connected, and being a good relative, not only to our blood relatives, but to our extended communities and things. Like this weekend, I will be traveling to Connecticut from Oklahoma for a ceremony for a Mi'kmaq relative that happened to live, on Mashantucket Pequot land. But to go because being a good relative, and she was my auntie. So of course I need to go and prepare food. And so we celebrate together, and it can be a strength. But having time and space for us to heal and grieve and I think you were so right in saying that, giving yourself time and space mentally and emotionally to come back to yourself, that after you have been in that, to give that time and space before just re-entering everything else that you have on your plate to do. Because when we don't honor that, when we try to live really rigid, we live in a world that we were never intended to survive in. And we're still here and thriving and connecting back with our people and our culture is healing and is strengthening, and what they've learned. And I don't know, I'm all excited and want to ask questions. So I know Jackie has more for us, but I want about the research of language programs and food programs of increasing mental wellness and reducing suicide, reducing substance misuse. Tradition is medicine.
Thank you, Shelby. I love that. Tradition is medicine. And just a big thank you to each of you in your openness and vulnerability and your responses. Each of you have already moved me, and as I can tell from the chat, many others. So thank you all for sharing in that last question. One thing that I want to discuss next that I heard a lot of already in your discussion between your connection to certain practices or to certain people and community. Those are such strengths. And I want to know, what strengths do you see in your Native and Indigenous communities that are unique to other cultures that you all really embrace?
I wanted to say firstly, to reflect what Jackie said, Mitakuye Oyechin. In Lakota, that means we're all related. So I want to say Wopila to all the participants, kind and generous remarks. Wopila participants, thank you for being here. I see that resiliency from our ancestors, resiliency through our culture, through our ceremonies, traditional healing practices. I am a traditional Lakota storyteller, so share creation stories. My grandmother was a daughter of a chief. My mother was granddaughter of a chief. I'm a great granddaughter of a chief. My grandmother was born in a teepee back in teepee days. My mother was born in one of those white tents, the cavalry used to have, those white, I don't know what they're called, canvas tents. She was born in that. And I was fortunately be able to born in Rosebud Indian Hospital. So that resiliency of the way we were born shows me that because of them, I'm here. And because of them, my children are here. And because of them, our 7th generations are going to move on through our creation stories. With the Lakota, with my tribe, our tribe is called Suchangu Lakota Oyate, Rosebud Sioux tribe for some, but burnt thigh people is what we're called. And back in Ihani days, back in teepee days, there was a huge prairie fire, and it was consuming our elders, our children, our parents, our relatives. So instead of letting the prairie fire consume us, our people ran through the fire. And that's how we got our name, burnt thigh people. But also during this time, the white buffalo calf woman came to our people and gifted us with the chanupa. The chanupa is the sacred pipe that's present at every ceremony that we have. That showed us resiliency to our people. And one thing that we learned from the white buffalo calf woman is that even during hard times, we come together as a tribe, as an Oyate, and come together for each other. The burnt thigh people through our creation stories show us how our culture is our anchor. And as a Lakota, I am very spiritually anchored and I believe in prayer. There's a difference between the spirituality to some, whereas others may consider it religion. But on my tribal flag, we have a cross on it. To us, that cross resembles the morning star. And that's telling us the morning star represents hope. And it's telling us that there's always going to be tomorrow through this hope that we have. When we look up into the sky and we see that morning star, we know that tomorrow's coming. So pray your way through hardship and difficult times, because that's the way our ancestors did. And that leads to the resilience of all of us as relatives. Mitakuye Oyechin, we're all related. Palamia.
Thank you, Dr. Yellow.
I'll jump in. Kind of going along with what they just expressed with, I think the biggest strength that I see between Indigenous communities is the interconnectedness, that we have the strong knowledge of that interconnectedness of all living things. And we can walk in a way that is conscious of that. And one of my favorite Indigenous wellness advocates, Tosh Collins, said that the health of the people reflects the health of the planet, and and vice versa. The health of the planet reflects the health of the people. And so how we move in our relationships with ourselves and in our relationships with others and in our relationships with all living things in the world around us, and having that understanding of that interconnectedness is a big strength that I believe that we move through the world with. Yeah.
Thank you, Lex.
I'm thinking that because I've lived in a lot of different, grew up, my sister was born in Japan, and then we moved to New Jersey. So we're there in Browns Mills, New Jersey. So that was kind of like a little small town. And then my grandma said to my mom, bring the kids back, back to the res. So then we moved back to the res, and then we live in Spokane and we go back. So I've been in a lot of different spaces, I think. And when I think about living on the reservation and living within our tribal communities, there's this, I think that it's our connection to the land, right? I think that that's what makes us so kind of unique from other cultures, in the sense that, and it's not just that we have this relationship to the land, that it's part of our psychocultural worldview, that we are the land, right? We're the people of the speckled fish. My hometown, the Sinchalich, we are the people of where the creeks hit the river and the water rings. Where we see over the top, so we have all of these names that we have that we're of this place, that we emerge from these places, that our languages emerge from these places, and that our languages embody that relationship. There's no separation. So there's people talk about, losing their connection to nature. And I was just reading a thing where, it's like, we are nature, so losing connection is like losing a connection to ourself, type of a thing. So how do we kind of reconnect to that? And that's why I feel like, you know, just our relationship to the earth, right? To the land, to the water, to all of the animals, all of the life that is in where, you know, where we're from is us. And that it's beyond deep ecology, right? And I think that that's why we're so passionate and so adamant about being a good relative to the land and taking care of the earth, you know, and being activists, you know, and advocates and doing whatever we can, because we're taking care of our relatives, we're taking care of ourselves and all of that. And so it's, to me, it's a whole different worldview. It's like a whole different worldview. And a lot of people don't realize how really different we are from like Western European worldview. You know, we're a collectivist culture. It's all about the we, you know, and the we includes the earth. The we includes all of life, you know, and we have stories that reinforce that relationship with the animals and the plants, you know, and the earth itself. And I just think about, you know, even the stars, right? The star knowledge that we have, you know, from being outside, you know, and understanding how all of the planets move, you know, how they're all connected. And when they move, then we know it's time to go harvest. You know, when the cotton flies, the salmon are coming, you know, and so that's the connection that I feel like that we as an Indigenous people is a conscious connection. Do you know what I mean? I think that a lot of people experience it, but I think what makes us unique is that we're aware, we're consciously aware all the time of that relationship and how we are in that space, so that we move intentionally, you know, like Shelby's talking about, you know, for 7 generations in the future, you know, we're always moving intentionally, you know, based on that psychocultural worldview. And it's fascinating, it's amazing, you know, and the more that people reveal it, the more excited I get. And it's the language, our tribal languages are what reveals that way of being in the world. And so that's why you can't just translate our language into English, because it loses it, you know. So like if I said Quetzmil, you know, which, you know, in our language means woman, right? But then if I just translated it into woman, it wouldn't really mean anything other than the English definition of woman. But in our language, what it means is to divide and separate into 2 human beings. And so it's a whole different way of experiencing life and life's processes in the world, you know, is that connection between language and our connection to place, to the earth, you know, and that it's a conscious relationship and awareness that we have, I think is what kind of makes us a little bit unique.
They said things so much more eloquently than I think that I can, but kind of, you know, bringing this back, we're talking about being a good relative and being connected. And on our journey, you know, we look at suicide risk among all Americans. And there is a really unique, distinct pattern when we look at suicide deaths among tribal communities, among tribal citizens. For our Caucasian counterparts, the suicide rates continue to go up throughout the lifespan and peak the 50s, 60s, especially for males. For our tribal communities, our rates are much higher when we're trying to find our way home. We know we don't belong, but we haven't found where we belong yet. And so from 10 to 24 up to 30, really, for our tribal men, the suicide rates are much higher. But then something pretty wonderful happens, and I need, you know, more researchers so we can spread the word. But our rates go down. Our rates drop below that and continue to go down, down, down. And I think some of it is that innate worldview of we are connected to everything, because being connected is a powerful protective factor. That sense of mental well-being of I am part of, I'm a good steward of the land. And so the sense when you see signs of people saying land back is like giving me back part of me, not necessarily give me the deed of paper but I need to be home. For our people, one of my relatives, her name was Morning Tree, and all of her family had, her brothers and sisters were named, Sally and Thomas and George, and looking, going, why was her name Sad Tree, Grieving Tree? It's like, this is such a distinct name. And so more of talking to elders and talking to people, and realized that at the time she was born right in the middle of the upheaval for our removal. And her name captured what was happening. Our people would go into the woods. We lived near the woods. We were a woodlands tribe. And knowing that we would have to leave our homelands, would rub their backs on the trees until they bled to leave part of themselves in their homeland. They were crying and weeping and saying goodbye to our relatives that we would never see again. And so feeling connected, that even if you are away from your family, connecting with nature, connecting with other things can give you that connection and help you to feel grounded. And I do think that is, and I don't know if it's distinct for us here on the North American continent, talking to different friends and relatives that are indigenous to Australia and New Zealand, they have very similar, but this is our homeland, and there is that unique connection to the land that is healing, that is very important, but very different than kind of the Western world looks at property ownership, things like that. But being connected, being one with the land doesn't necessarily mean holding the title to that particular piece of land. But I see those as strengths and connectedness that help us find where we belong, even if we have all of the barriers and things that have happened to our family structures due to boarding school, things like that. For those, if you want to really look at and admire the resiliency and strength, read that volume 1 of the report. I believe it's on page 38, where it says, that stuck with me. And I have to admit, I only made it to page 55. It was just too upsetting for me. But page 38, that one of the justifications for the boarding school was our strong family and community ties. That was a distinct overarching feature in the tribal communities that they were trying to destroy, was they could not defeat our spirit because of we would always take care of our families. And I think that's a wisdom we can share with other Americans. I've had mental health professionals come to our trainings and say, I'm working with this tribal client, and they only see things as benefiting the community. They won't look at their own self-healing separate. And I was like, well, how can you separate yourself from your environment to heal separately? Where is this a negative that they are seeing themselves as part of their family unit instead of an individual being? And so looking at that in mental health spaces as a strength instead of a weakness may be a good place to start.
Just beautiful words from everyone. I think the thing that's really sitting with me right now is connection. And even as like Indigenous peoples, like we're not a monolith. Like we have different names for ourselves. We have different names for our territories. And yet we still all have this idea of connection. And I think for me, my community has really helped me navigate my queer identity. And on the topic of like language, like Dr. Martina was sharing, for Yoame people, our traditional language is called Hiaknoki. It means like the person who speaks. But in our language, we say apo as a pronoun. And it's really just this, it's not so much of like a she, a he, they, it's a genderless pronoun that describes our relationship to our environment. And it's back in that topic of you can't translate that into English in just an easy way. It's a deeper meaning than that. And so just really, I think living in a, living in the so-called States in a patriarchal heteronormative environment, it's a lot about like that. In that connection, we reclaim our identities. In that connection, we reclaim our connection with our ancestors, with our communities, with ourselves. And knowing that our ancestors are watching us and are walking with us and guiding us, reminds us that we're not alone, and personally looking back on my family, like we had queer relatives, we had queer Indigenous relatives. And so it blows my mind when I've had because I go to college, I've had other students come up and say like, oh, like being queer is a new thing. It's not. It's existed within our communities for a long time. It's personally in like my nations, they're seen as medicine people. They're seen as like war chiefs. They're seen as, these high figures in our communities. So for me, it's once again that connection, not just with like a single identity of being Indigenous, but also my queer identity as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. Go ahead, Dr.
Could I just kind of follow up on that? The other thing that I found that was just so really cool about, so my language is the Inselchin language. And in our language, we have no gender pronouns. There are none. So, when we say Kulanchutin, which is our word for creator, it's not a he, she, it's, that which creates itself. So there's no gender pronouns. So there's no way, so there's no status assigned to gender in that way. There's no power assigned to the gender. And so the only way that like if it is a gender, who you're talking to, is in the context of the sentence. So that's the only way that because, like we would say, it's either he, she, it, or, in English, right? But in our way, there just wouldn't be, you wouldn't need a gender. There's no need to have a gender pronoun in our language, and so that's what's so cool about it. And that's why I think that, tribal languages, Indigenous languages are so fascinating, because it really is decolonizing, the more that we bring it into our world and our consciousness and in our practice, that it expands our experience of life in the universe, rather than having these categories and domains, and everybody's, in this spot and you're here. And it just kind of opens up the boundaries in the sense. And it's like, no, it's much bigger than that. And we're much more than that, so thank you for bringing that up, because it's always something. And I'm like, we don't need gender pronouns. We're just like, it's not necessary in our cultures, right?
I just wanted to bounce off what Dr. Martinez said and share with our young relative here, Bree. B. In Lakota, our story, we refer to our special folks as Winkdays, but traditionally they were called two hearts. And the story with the two hearts is, I may not be able to love a woman the same way that I can love a man. So that creates the two hearts. And in our Lakota society, two hearts, which are now referred to as two spirits, but traditional two hearts, they're sacred, and they're sometimes just as powerful as the medicine man. So in old teepee days, I'm sorry for going back to old teepee days, but teepee days, they were left behind with the camp to help take care of the village, because the Winkday had the spirit of both, had the strength of both the male, the physical strength, but also the love from the heart of the female. So they stayed behind to help take care of the women, the elders, and the children and the babies. So thank you for sharing that story. And remember that two hearts are very sacred in tribal society.
Thank you for that, Dr. Yellenroth and Dr. Martina, and B, for sharing. Wow, our time has completely flown by, and I know we are right at the end of our session here together. But I just want to say I can hear your strong spirit and connectedness, not only to your culture, but really to yourselves and to our earth. And it is both inspiring to me, and I've learned so much, and I love seeing those of you that are connecting in the chat, and just want to thank you all for joining us and being here today, and sharing your experiences as well. And a very special thank you to each of our panelists. Thank you for your openness, your honestness, your vulnerability, and your knowledge. And we just appreciate you so much for being here today. I will mention that we will send out a follow-up email in the next week, and that will include a link to this recording if you do want to share it. And then any of the links, I know our panelists have mentioned a few different resources and things that they've shared throughout today. So we'll also include those in the follow-up. So thank you all for being here. And one final thank you to our panelists for sharing with us today in this space.
Jackie, can I just say
Yes.
thanks to everyone from the Fellowship of the Earrings. Right, ladies? You got to have the indigenous bling. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all.
I love it. Thank you. All.
Happy holidays.